The Football Show on Off the Ball.
With Sky. Watch every single live Premier League game on Sky Sports, BT Sport and Premier Sports.
I'm prepared to do anything I can to play for my country again.
Do it then.
What about your start to the game?
It wasn't bad, was it?
Why should an honest answer be a mistake?
How can a modern day manager not have a mobile phone?
Why should he?
Okay, you're welcome along to the Football Show. We are signing off on an international window for Stephen Kenny, which I think we can safely chalk up as positive in the extreme. 7-0 on aggregate across 2 games. Tougher opposition, of course, in store next month. But still, there was, in particular last night, something so obviously encouraging about the performances. Later on, we'll chat to Lisa Fallon. First, though, very happy to say Daniel McDonnell of the Irish Independent is with us. Hey, Dan.
Hello, Joe.
Good to have you with us. Last night's performance was incredibly encouraging. You were there. I presume that was very apparent very early in this game at the stadium.
Yeah, it's a strange one, really. When you think that I think the Kenny era, as it is, has been so probably fraught. And I think, that some of the games have been a slow burn as well. And actually, it's not just the Kenny era. You go back to Ireland games and a lot of Ireland games in recent memory, it's very hard to remember, other than maybe like Gibraltar being beaten 7-0 or something, which is obviously the last time an Ireland player scored a hat-trick prior to last night. It's hard to remember too many games where the outcome was so clear from the early minutes, so clear that this was going to be a comfortable win. And I think it was a bit of a surprise. I mean, Stephen Kenny said it himself. Like Qatar looked really bad last night, but their record isn't really bad. Now clearly they looked like a team that wasn't in great heart and almost sort of waved the white flag at times, which was unusual. But in fairness, I think you have to say that Ireland also have a tendency to make bad teams look good over the years, and sort of drove home from the start, made it uncomfortable for them, and really just made it an unpleasant experience, but not in a sort of an ugly way, just in a sort of a dominant in all aspects of the game way. And I think, after every Ireland game, again, like there's a lot of confirmation bias that can be at play in some of the debates around the Kenny era, that world rankings matter. No, they don't matter. They're 117th in the world, but yeah, you can look at recent results in a real sort of crude. Well, they lost to them 3-0, or they beat them 1-0, or like Qatar. You could find whatever you want in Qatar's recent results. You can find great results. You can find some disappointing results, but I don't think you find too many games where they've been pulverised like that. I think, in fairness, you have to give Ireland some credit for that.
If you take overall picture for a second, I mean, I was starting to wonder if this thing was just cursed and doomed to fail, and if maybe he was the right man in the wrong time, because momentum just seemed so strongly on various fronts against Kenny and his background team. September, the previous window, was the first time really I got a sense that he and the team were finding a groove and a shape and a formation, and relationships were starting to develop on the pitch, and that boulder was finally just starting to roll, albeit though with that setback at home to Azerbaijan, which again was a concern. But a month on, this thing now is starting to look coherent, and there is a familiarity about what they're doing. And as you begin to assess where he is and where the team are as November comes into view, and November's still important for him, of course, Luxembourg away in particular, and a decent showing against Portugal, you suspect he still needs. But I don't know, the notion that he wouldn't really be in pole position to get another contract at this stage now, I find questionable. This is not crumbling around him. This is not a team very clearly losing faith, or players starting to lose faith. This is going in the opposite direction at this stage. Yeah,
listen, I mean, I'm sort of writing on this for tomorrow. I guess my take on it would be the only thing that could stop him getting a further 2 years or getting an extension would be, a catastrophic November or an act of lunacy from the FAI board. I think they are the only two scenarios whereby he doesn't get that chance. I mean, I've covered a lot of Ireland managers, Joe. I've covered a fair few, club managers, and we all know what it looks like when something is nearing the end of the road. It has that stench. I always think with Martin O'Neill, it was probably that 4-1 defeat to Wales in Cardiff, where you were just thinking, wow, this thing is gone. And in fairness, it was maybe 2 years previously where they'd won in Austria and been very good, away. And like, you just know, like, yeah, this is done. And you can go through time and pick out other examples. The idea that this would be like the penultimate international window of the Kenny era is just nonsensical to me. It's just implausible. And I think anyone who sees things that way, thinks that that's really plausible scenario. Beyond what, as I said, like, something mad can happen, something crazy can happen where your team has a Cyprus night in Luxembourg. But I think, to be fair, you're looking at this last night and across recent games and thinking, I just can't see that happening. You just can't see. You can't see all of a sudden, like, everything going out the window and a sort of a shapeless performance ensuing that change, leads you to question everything. And even if that did happen, you could actually argue and say, well, October was good, November was bad. We'll stick with it a bit longer. Do you know what I mean? Like, I think he didn't have that credit in the bank before now, whereby teams, you could say, well, they've shown that they can learn from their lessons and do this and this and this. And it's encouraging. Now, I'm very conscious of just, you have to still keep it in check and not declare, well, this is it, this is happening now. But also at times you have to call what you think you're seeing with your own eyes. And I think for me, actually, you mentioned in September as a point. I would have thought the game in Hungary in June actually was a significant one, because you could see, as much as like against Andorra, I think they took their eye off the ball in the Andorra game a small bit, and their sort of contribution to that game wasn't great. I think the focus of that gathering was Hungary. I think the tactical approach for that game was Hungary, and that probably led to a performance in that game where you felt, okay, they're not experimenting too much. They brought Ogbeni off the bench. There was various changes they made, which sort of made you look like, okay, this is something. They carried it into September. What they got wrong in September was the balance between a really focused, good away display and how to apply it at home. I think in this October window, they've realised maybe what you need to do in some of the home games following up from an away game. So you can see an evolution, you can see progress. And I think what Roy Barrett and Jerry McEnany it was who spoke, I'm trying to think when this was now, but it was certainly post-March about Kenny's situation. It was probably in the aftermath of Luxembourg, I think, potentially. And the whole line about where decision and how decisions would be reached was that, well, you want to see progress between now and the end of the year. That in November you can see progress from March, say. Well, it wasn't directly what was said, but in effect. And I think that's the key thing to bear in mind with this here. I'm seeing some people saying, and I think there's a sort of a opportunistic slant to it. Well, Kenny now needs to finish third in the group. And I see where it comes from to a degree, but like Ireland can lose at home to Portugal next month. And if Luxembourg win on Baku on the same night, Ireland can't finish third. It's just not possible for them to finish third. So like to me, the finishing position in the table is almost irrelevant. Now, once you can see enough in their performances in November that prove that they're not the same abject ones you were seeing against Luxembourg in March, and like to suddenly come back and now and say we need to make decisions in November based on things that happened in March. Again, if anyone on the board is like briefing that, right, and if that's their perspective, I'd be worried about those people sitting on the board. If that's their view. And I mean, there has been some stuff out there that I don't think people are plucking it off. Plucking it off sort of their imagination. I don't believe that's the case at all. I don't agree with some of the spin that has been put on things. The suggestion last month that he was vulnerable to the bullet if they'd lost to Serbia. But clearly that was coming from somewhere. I just don't think that was coming from somewhere that was in touch with the reality of maybe the reality of the decision that where the decision making progress is going to go. I'm not sure if they're going to be the influential power brokers when it comes to sitting down, because I think most people reasonably can say it's about seeing a graph. It's about seeing it trending upwards. And I think what we're seeing is addressing mistakes that were made in the past and responding to them. And so I think what they need to do in November is show more of that. But it's not necessarily a case of have to finish third or else. But it's more a case of proving that the penny is dropping.
Yeah, well, the nature of the performances with now and say March is night and day. It is night and day. Last night was just a joy to watch, and that really is not something you can say about the vast majority of Irish performances. I think, beating a team at home that you would really hope and expect might be a strong word, but expect them to do it in that kind of fashion is not something that we make a habit of doing. So, it's funny, I threw it out on Twitter. I said something good is happening here under Kenny. It's really apparent. If you watch your football, you know your football. It's apparent watching this team. Something good is happening. And some people seem to read that tweet as me saying Ireland are perfect in every way and that Qatar are an amazing team. None of those things were true, but the nature of the performance was different. And it was the kind of thing, if Kenny had done it early in his regime, we all would have got very, very excited. It has taken in some time. 2020 was a complete write-off. I think the management team have learned on the job a little bit, and they had to get their ducks in a row behind the scenes as well. But it is starting to come together in a big way. And I don't know what you might have in the stadium, but there were just so many moments where you thought, wow, this is really good. One that jumped to my mind, because I think they have been guilty of overplaying, actually, and have made themselves susceptible to pressing at times. But there was a moment, I just jotted it down. I said, wow, this is things coming together in a far better balanced way. It was the 6th minute and ball goes back. This is just an example of the way they were moving the ball at times. Ball goes back to Keller and Conor Hourihane sprints back. I mean, he really sprints back and takes the ball off goalkeeper, gives it to Hendrick. Jeff Hendrick peels onto the right wing. Matt Doherty is still 30 yards further up the wing. Hendrick takes it from Bamadelli, gives it up to Doherty. He makes his way into the box. It was around then the Qatar player rolled his ankle and went down injured for a while. But I mean, it was working it through the lines, but in a direct way, in a very effective way. And there were moments like that right the way through. I mean, an example people might remember is when Hourihane, who was pretty good, by the way, wasn't he? He flashed a great cross in the first half across the box for Ogbene. And Ogbene just missed out on it, kind of that corridor of uncertainty, that great cliche. But if you took a freeze frame of Hourihane putting that cross in, it's Jamie McGrath outside the box, playing it back to Hourihane on the edge of the box, and Enda Stevens has underlapped and he's inside the box. And there's all kind of players around and moving and looking for the ball. And we just don't take opposition apart like that too often. And for me, that was an example of when you watched, for instance, Dundalk feeling good about life under Kenny. That was what I saw last night. And it's not perfect. It's never going to be perfect. We're not going to win the World Cup. But in terms of a team that is moving forward and expressing themselves, I thought last night was absolutely brilliant. That was brilliant.
Yeah, look, I think, there's a couple of things to that. I mean, I think there is no doubt that, like, other teams will press the team with more intensity than Qatar did. And, like, good footballers, they are all good footballers. And actually, you mentioned, say, Hourihane last night, and maybe even Stevens, like Hourihane playing ahead of Cullen, Stevens playing ahead of McLean. Like, it actually, the nature of the game suited them, because, like, the Ireland were controlling the ball there, and they're very comfortable with the short passes, the 1-2s, the little exchanges. Whereas you might say at times, if last night's game had required Conor Hourihane to be on the chase for all of the match, it might have been harder for him, to be as impactful. I think he's a good player, by the way. I'm just saying that there's no doubt that the nature of the game allowed the personnel in the game to show their best side as well too. Yeah. But I do know what you're saying on that. I think maybe to sort of go back to my previous point, and people will obviously say, there's a danger of getting carried away, and I understand that. But I think it's more the sense that you feel there's more left to run in this story. You feel like you want to see what happens next.
They're at the start of it. And I think you can be too apologetic for getting carried away. We're not getting carried away in the sense that we're going to beat Portugal and hammer Luxembourg. We may very well, I would think, find Luxembourg tough opposition. We will most likely lose to Portugal. There's every chance. With Portugal, we're not going to be bossing the game the way we were last night. It'll be a more back-to-the-wall, organised performance. All of that still stands. So no one's getting carried away. But at the same time, I don't think we should apologise either. We've watched a lot of football. We've basically sat through every single Ireland match in our lives. I wouldn't think there's many we've missed. This was a real step forward. And I don't think we should apologise for staying it. Because a few loudmouths on Twitter want to say, well, it's only Qatar and it's only this. They're probably not watching the game closely, Dan. This was different.
It was. No, it was. And as I said, like, I just think there needs to be a next stage of the debate around Kenny's Ireland, and I think that it's almost a sense of letting it breathe to some degree and moving beyond this every game being like poised on a knife edge. I think that people are interested in the players and the stories and the development and seeing where it goes. And like there comes a point where you just have to say that what happened. Like this whole thing about 3 wins in 18 games, I mean, it's factually true, but at what point do you stop talking about the collective of every game that the managers had in charge and not just look at, okay, well, the 2021 record versus the 2020 record. Like when Mick McCarthy was doing great things in 2000, where people saying, well, he's doing well, but he did lose to Macedonia 3-2 in 1997. People still going on about stuff from last year, which was last year. And I think, it's you have to sort of apply context to all of these positions. I even think things like having fans back in the stadium is very significant, and you sort of forget that there was a lot of strange stuff going on last year. So let's take it in the here and now and see where it goes. And all I'm saying is, Stephen Kenny afterwards, I mean, the one thing I wasn't sure that he got the right pitch of it last night was he was in great form in the press conference. And then towards his last answer, it was a relatively softball question about where they can go from here. And he starts going on about, well, our target now is to win our Nations League group next year. And I was sort of thinking, okay, just pull back from that a small bit. I love the enthusiasm and I think, how he spoke about the players, and we could talk maybe about how some of the older players, he's drawing really good performances from them, which I think is really significant. And I think the balance of the squad, the balance of the older players that he's kept in the squad, I think there's a lot of good squad building things. But I was just thinking there, that is the danger of like making a rod for your own back. Do we
even know who is in our Nations League group?
Well, no, the draw is next month, but
we're going to win it.
But Ireland could have a very good Nations League campaign and come second. But now you haven't met your own target that you've set for yourself. Do
you think Kenny bringing up the Nations League is trying to reframe this? Is he trying to reframe this? Well, everything's decided at the end of November. Is he bringing this up in a way to remind everyone my contract goes to the summer?
I think there's a bit of, well, I'm going to jump down the road here because I'm confident I'm going to be here. And I think he will be there. As I said in my earlier statement stands, I just can't believe, barring, as I said, like 2 of the worst games in Irish football history, or, an FAI board suddenly deciding they're going to roll the dice at a time when I don't think the public will agree with it. I think that would be an interesting move for an FAI board to take. I just can't see that happening unless they've lost their minds. I think maybe Kenny is playing a bit of a, he's done this before, and I'm not sure if it's always the best thing to do. I think when you've had a positive window, 2 really good games, and move into November, it was just one answer that he just sort of got a bit in the moment. And listen, human nature is such that you're enthusiastic, but just need to just keep this going. I think the attitude of some people I would be aware of who'd be quite supportive of Stephen Kenny, and their attitude would have been post-Azerbaijan, that there's going to be more bumps in the road with this. There will be bad days, and I suppose what Kenny needs to do is get enough credit in the bank to the place where if there is a bad day, it's just, well, that was a bad day, they could have played better, rather than it being one bad result stimulating this whole, well, maybe he needs to go discussion. And there'll always be an element of that extreme around the Irish national team. There always has been, through persistent managers, where they haven't all had too many days where they're under such a steady footing, particularly as the previous regime was so reactive to the mood, that there's always an element of crisis talk. But what Kenny needs to get to is to a place where those Nations League games next year, actually 4 in June and 2 in September, that you want good results, but maybe with this group of players, there will be days where it won't quite happen for them. I think, to be fair, there's very valid questions that can still be raised about the setup of the team in the sense of the formation they're trying to play. And I still think they need to tighten up aspects of that. Because a really, really slick, top-class counter-attacking team will sort of, to use the phrase, will transition quickly and hurt Ireland. So I think they've work to do.
No, I agree with that.
I think what's encouraging is that a couple of windows back, we were talking about we were hoping for more attacking variety in the Irish play. We were hoping to see more. And I liked what I saw last night. I actually like Colin Robinson as a central striker, almost the false nine at times in terms of dropping deep, getting involved, but then creating space for those around him. McGrath is so intelligent. And Ogbene's pace. And you're thinking, we have a bit of variety here. I think that was the most encouraging thing.
I agree with you on tightening up and Ireland's vulnerability to counter-attack. That's definitely there. And Portugal, I suspect, will see more help for Howard and Hendrick in midfield, or I presume it'll be Cullen and Hendrick, against Portugal. But that's okay. That's a horses for courses decision. And against Azerbaijan and certainly Qatar at home, I think you're entitled to try and play in the front foot and hope the two boys can keep things safe when Qatar do try and counter-attack. But that's a concern for sure. You look at the team last night, so Kelleher obviously gets a start. That's great. Mbamidele has been uber impressive. Egan, really solid. You can tell he's a leader, captain on Saturday. We'll come to Duffy in a second. Doherty, club level's not gone well for him. We're seeing brilliant performances from him in Ireland. Like I said, Harron, very good. We'll come back to Hendrick. Stephen's back after 6 months. He knows he has to play well now because of McLean. And if Coleman comes back and Doherty goes on the left, for instance, so you would expect to see good performance from him. And you've mentioned Ogbene, McGrath, Robinson. One of the reasons I was really looking forward to seeing what Kenny brought to the Irish setup was that at Dundalk, for instance, he had a reputation for taking players and getting them to produce the kind of football you didn't think they had in them, not least centre-halves. And I do remember Duffy's first game, it was Kenny's first game, and I just thought, this is not going to work. He's going to struggle here because it was really uninspiring. He was uncomfortable on the ball. He didn't like what he was being asked to do, and we looked so vulnerable. You fast forward to last night, he's a man reborn on the ball. He really is. And Hendrick as well. That's one of Hendrick's best 2 games in a row since 2016, I think we can safely say. So some of those older players, as well as the younger players, but some of those older players are now producing performances that I questioned in my own head, would we see from them again in Hendrick's case? And, Duffy, always a brilliant defender, always likely to score from corners and be a useful player. But in terms of what he's contributing on the ball, I was like, we just, with various managers now, we've never seen this from Duffy too often in Irish jersey. That kind of stuff is massively encouraging. And like I said, Kenny have a reputation for that at Dundalk. You would have seen players he developed on the ball.
Yeah, I suppose I think Duffy and Hendrick, I nearly split them up because in a way, Kenny did do that, but I think it was more a case of Kenny believing that you are good players and seeing that they're good players and then encouraging them to be brave and to take the chances and to believe in themselves to do that. Now, I think to be fair with Shane Duffy, his renaissance has happened at club level where he needs to be able to, in a Graham Potter side, he needs to be able to play, and clearly Shane Duffy has made changes in his life in the summer that have helped him and that with that comes confidence, and maybe it comes the confidence to try some things. And maybe last year when you watched him, maybe he's not capable of some of these things, or maybe he was just lacking confidence to actually do it and he had a difficult time. I mean, Shane Duffy was it's a couple of people would mention, well, Stephen Kenny dropped Shane Duffy in March as though it was a bad thing, even though Shane Duffy spoke after the game in Baku and admitted it was the right thing to do. There's almost a sense that because it's a kind of revisionism in a way that because Shane Duffy played well in September and October, he shouldn't have been dropped in March. That was actually the right thing. Whereas I think what Kenny has got right is the man management of, he brought him in, he played him against Qatar, and I think the summer was good. I think that's where Kenny can take some credit for that. But to be fair, I think it's at Brighton where Duffy is.
I get that, but the football that he's playing is different. He's come back into form. That would have happened to Brighton. His defending's back in form. He's still a threat of corners, but actually there's an extra layer now. And it's because his Irish manager is asking him to do things that he wasn't previously asked to do, and he has grown into those demands.
Yeah, no, I can see that point. I think the Hendrick one is really interesting. I think Hendrick is definitely one that I think, Kenny has to take credit for, I believe, and I think I listened to maybe Kenny maybe speaking about it this morning, that it's about sort of finding a role that actually suits him as well too, Hendrick, that how many times, and in fact in Kenny's early games, I mean last year was it maybe in Finland he was playing as a number 10, almost looking for him to like set the press as a number 10. But then, and previous managers have had him with his back to goal and a lot. And I think as well, like you could just see with Jeff Hendrick last night that he just looked happy. Like he looked like he was actually enjoying the game. That the crowd was encouraging him to shoot. And like again, like the thing about Jeff Hendrick would be, for all the grief he's taken from Irish fans over the years, you talk to any Irish players of his generation, and if you were to say to them like who would be the top 3 players in the squad, Hendrick would come up a lot. They would say if you see him in training, he's brilliant. And he hasn't necessarily always brought that to the pitch. And for whatever reason, he's struggled. And you could talk about maybe, could you say it was tactical? Could you say he just wasn't enjoying it? Could you say the ball was going over his head sometimes? Could you say his head himself wasn't right sometimes? I don't know. But you see him with the confidence to try things and the freedom to try things. And he is one that I think is thriving. And I think that definitely... I think Kenny can take a huge amount of credit for that one. I'm not saying he can't for Duffy. I think he's managed that situation well. But like Hendrick is still going to go back to Newcastle and possibly not play between now and the next window. So then there's a lot of scrutiny on what Kenny can get out of him when he's there. Whereas Duffy looks like a guy who is at the moment playing regularly and winning in the Premier League.
Yeah. Listen, great stuff. Thanks so much. We'll probably chat a bit about this a touch more when you're in next week, I'm sure, as well. Dan McDonnell of the Irish Independent. Thanks a million, Dan. Cheers.
Thanks, Joe.
Now you're welcome, Max. So this is the football show. It is brought to you by Sky. All the football you love in one place across Sky Sports, BT Sport and Premier Sports. Myself and Dan McDonnell have been chatting there. Very happy to bring in Lisa Fallon. Hey, Lisa.
Hi, how are you?
Yeah, very good. Dan is often, I think, a bit cautious to be seen too much as Kenny's man. So I was going extra positive on last night's result. But you know what? I make no apologies. Even Didi Hamann, grudgingly, had to concede. This was very good from an Irish team. So give us your take on last night's performance. In particular, I know the result was great, but the performance, the manner of it, and I guess where Stephen Kenny is with this team. Because, geez, it feels like finally the boulder is starting to roll.
Yeah, I think it was a good performance. I think there was lots of really nice elements to the performance. And the most important thing was the result and the manner of getting the result. Because, up until now, we've had relatively good performances with the absence of the result. You might get a result and the performance, like at senior football level, the result, it's always about the result. As long as you're trying to do the right stuff, it doesn't really matter how the ball goes in and how you win the game, as long as you win the game. And that's ultimately what that level of the game is about. But I think last night we were really good in possession. We controlled the game in possession. We controlled the game out of possession. We created different types of chances. We scored different types of goals. And like you look at I know Callum Robinson had an outstanding game, and he gets all the headlines for the hat trick. But for me, I thought Jeff Hendrick was incredible. I mean, the way he played. He ran midfield. He dictated it. His creative passing. He broke lines. He saw the runs that the lads ahead of him were making. He was so important in everything that Ireland did. And for me, one of the nicest parts about the performance is the types of performances we're starting to see from players that we haven't seen those types of performances from in a while, and that is indicative, I think, of the response of the players to the way they're being asked to play and the work that's been done with them. And look, yes, Qatar were poor. They're probably not as poor as we made them look last night. But Ireland did make them look that poor. And once, they were a bit shell-shocked early in the game, the way Ireland came out of the blocks. And, after quite early on, you could see they would really rather have been on the plane home. Yeah. But lots of really good, positive aspects to it. But again, look, it's always about, since it's the nature of football, as soon as the full-time whistle goes, it's always about the next game. And we have got bigger tests ahead, but I think you can't ignore the fact that there is a change, and that you can't but see the different dimension to this team that we've never seen before. And that is great to see.
Yeah, I totally agree. This is different to what we've seen previously. I was worried back in March, I have to say. I just thought, I was saying to Dan, is this right man, wrong time, momentum, bad luck, really hard to turn this around? And I think they have. And last night, and to an extent against Azerbaijan on Saturday as well, what we are seeing now is different. That variety that you're talking about in possession, and I do take the point about Qatar, absolutely. But equally, that Qatar team looked a lot better and a lot more comfortable back in March. And so no performance is in isolation. So, I mean, teams look bad against better teams, and they look better against, a more typical Irish performance down the years. Qatar would have grown into that game, and after half an hour, we would have been saying, geez, they're actually keeping the ball better than us. Like we've been those soldiers at those games lots of times. And this Irish performance didn't allow that to happen. The variety that you talked about, why do you think that was happening? I mean, is it down to movement? I was mentioning to Dan as well, a couple of occasions where remember Heron sprinting back to take a ball off keeper, and it goes to Bamadeli. He flicks it up to line to Hendrick, who kept peeling into that kind of right channel and finding joy there, and he flicks it up to Doherty, who's suddenly in their area. And you're thinking, well, that is playing through the lines, and that's not just passive possession in our own half. So a lot of this stuff was starting to happen, and you could see the players growing in confidence. They're almost looking around each other saying, this is starting to click a little bit. And you can almost see them realize that players sense that when they're out there.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, I think Ireland have been really good at some stuff over the years. And it's not to say that that's any worse or better than the way it is now. It's just, I think it's really important not to lose what you're good at, to keep those elements. So being really strong on set pieces and at the end of crosses, and being able to put teams under pressure and pressing them high, and that fierce Irish work rate that we've always associated, and that will to go to the wall, that Irish teams, it's like an aura that you get when you put the jersey on. It's part of who we are. And I think there was maybe we moved away from that a little bit too much early doors, and tried to go too far the other way. Whereas it's easier just to build on what you have and then start adding the layers. And I think this is the first time we've seen a team that has layers to it. You can see the work that's being done, because probably before, players would not have been encouraged to play through the lines. It would have been, let's get it up into the final third of the pitch and we'll squeeze them from there and try and play from there. But now we can see players are being encouraged to, okay, if it's not on to play into the first line, we'll play into the second one, and we can go into the third one, and we can play from there. So you're starting to play from different parts of the pitch. But there's also a plan. You can see there's a structure and a reason to what the players are trying to do. I think there was elements of that didn't quite click on against Azerbaijan. Started quite well. I thought the front three got a little bit separated from the rest of the team. They were playing more of a front three when really it's a 3-4-2-1. So they needed to be dropping in. And when they did drop in, we were able to play through the lines. And I think that's probably something that they identified and worked on, because you could see that we were much more proactive at dropping in and connecting and creating those angles, those passing lanes for the players that were in possession. So they always had an option to play forward, which, and again, that comes with just a bit of repetition, a bit more time on the pitch, and players going out and experiencing it and going, right, this is working. This is where we need to be better, or we need to be just more consistent with it. But yeah, it was nice to watch. I enjoyed watching it.
I know. It's weird.
And I don't think we should be afraid to say that. Even people who haven't been supporters of Stephen Kenny, or maybe had doubts, I don't think you don't be afraid to say it was good, because it was.
I think people who've been behind Kenny are a little bit reticent now, because it feels like you're being triumphalist and it's premature. Nobody is saying they're going to beat Portugal. Nobody is saying Luxembourg is some guaranteed win now and everything's clicked. Far from it. Nobody is saying Euro 2024 is a guarantee. It's just a sense of progress. And I think a relief that this thing isn't going to crumble the way for a time. You were worried it would for a time. I wonder, when you talk about the better balance in what the team are doing, as in they're, if they need to, they're more prepared to take more pragmatic options. I wondered at the start when they're trying to implement this new style, it was like they were slavishly sticking to it. You know, it was like they felt, oh, we keep the ball now. That's what we do. And they almost forgot about hurting teams at times.
Yeah, and that's what I said. Like maybe it just went a little bit too far the other way at the start, because I think you don't always have to start at the bottom. You start at what are the strengths of this team? What are the things that we have already? Because Ireland has some seriously good attributes, so don't lose them. In favour of trying something else and start from scratch. You don't need to reinvent the wheel. What you want to do is get the wheel to turn a bit faster and to gather pace and momentum. And you have to add stuff to it to generate that power and that momentum. And that's, I think, where we are now. I think over the last probably 6 months, we're starting to see a little bit, not going back to where we were, but going, hang on a minute, you know what? Yeah. It's actually okay to say we were good at being direct. It's okay to say that we're good at set pieces. It's okay to say that we're good at pressing and winning the ball back high up the pitch, because they're all elements of the game that you need. And, you know, when we play across a group, you're going to play against different types of teams. You're going to play against teams you're going to have to sit in against. And you're going to have to suck it up, and you're going to have to suffer a bit, and you're going to have to play in the counter-attack and maybe counter-attacking to earn a set piece. There'll be other games where we're going to play against teams where it might be a bit more 50-50. They'll have it, we'll have it. And you know, we'll have to do our defending, but we'll get our opportunities to attack. And then there's going to be other games where you have to go, right, they're going to sit in on us and they're going to make it as hard as possible for us. And we're going to have to find ways to break them down. And traditionally, we were actually good at playing the harder teams, because we were the ones. It's almost easier to make it difficult for teams. Where we struggled was when we played against teams that sat in against us, and we found it hard to break them down. And for me, that's the biggest new dimension to what we're doing at the moment, is that now we look like a team that can start to break teams down. We can keep the ball and move them and wait for the opportunities to open up and spot them when they happen, because we're actively trying to create that. You know, there's a purpose to it.
There was such a tempo to last night, and it never really dropped. And I agree with you. Like, I'm never that worried in a perverse way against the Portugals, because not that I think we'll win, but like, we'll be resolute and we'll get organised and we'll make it difficult for them. And that game will kind of take care of itself. It's against Qatar in Dublin, where too often we'll resort to lumping 85 crosses in from angles and not much will happen. And that was why last night was like, wow, I mean, you got to see something's happening here. This is a bit different on the pragmatism point, because Brian Kerr was on recently, and he definitely was of the opinion that Stephen Kenny underestimated just how difficult it would be for this Irish team to suddenly start playing through the lines from goalkeeper out. Underestimate how difficult that would be. And you think of Luxembourg pressing Ireland in March, and it was really bad. And then you think of Baku, and suddenly you have Bazunu more than happy to boot the ball past halfway routinely. I'm curious, do you think the pragmatism might keep turning another few notches, particularly in midfield? Like if it's Hendrick and Cullen, or Hendrick and, you know, Harahan was very good last night. Yes, yeah. You say we're playing like 3 up top, 2 behind a 1. Might we have to drag one of those 2 back into midfield ultimately? Is that where this could go, or will it depend on the opposition?
It depends on the opposition, because if you look at the way we played against Portugal, the 2 as such behind the 1 actually dropped in either side. So we looked like a 5-4-1. Yeah. So that's the way it is, that they just drop in alongside the 2 lads in the middle. And that's where that's your kind of defensive structure. And then in attack, they push on. And they get into that space in between the lines. And then, like, even if you want to be more aggressive, you can push them on even further and pin them right up against the back 4 or the back 3 to stop fullbacks coming out. Or if you're playing against a 3, to play outside the 3, the left and the right centre back. So you're causing a problem, and then that means that they can't come in. So you're opening up space in the middle of the park and in the wide areas. So like, that's what I'm saying. There's different ways.
And can I ask you then, when you were watching the game in Baku, after that first 15 minutes, which were really good, and then Azerbaijan got a hold of the game for maybe the next half hour. Who was it that night? It was Horgan and Robinson as the two. Like, should they have dropped in a bit more to try and wrestle back control of the game a little bit there?
Because if you look at the goal, the first goal, that's exactly where it came from. When the ball broke and when we won the ball back and we were able to play straight through the lines into Callum Robinson, who had dropped in. Daryl Horgan was dropped in alongside him, so he's able to play a square pass and then release James McLean out on the left. So we were able to get in between the line to play as a result of being in those pockets, because it's difficult, because if you're in behind their midfield and in front of their defenders, it's like, well, who picks it up?
Yeah, no, I totally get that. I get, attacking wise, it's great. I was wondering, should one of them have dropped back more to help Cullen and Hendrick that night when we didn't have control of the game? Like, were we asking too much of Cullen and Hendrick?
That's what was wrong, because then when the three were kind of caught high, and I don't think it was the intention for them to play high. It didn't look like that. I think the intention was that they should have been in there. But I think, again, it's just that concentration and maybe understanding the role that you do it for a while, you score a goal and go grand. But it's too early to start smoking the cigars at that point. You know, you have to get back in and do that work. And even, you know, I thought that I showed it last night. There was an example where we pressed high. So the three lads had a really good aggressive press on. You know, Hendrick and Cullen were back on the edge of the centre circle, and the back three were in our own half, and that's where they have the responsibility to push up and connect. Yeah. That when the ball comes out, we're in that area where we can pick it up. So, but again, that just comes from getting used to the system and just being switched on at all those different moments of the game. But you know, do you need in possession and out of possession in that formation? That's the purpose of those two players, is to drop in and help out with the midfield when you're defending, and then as soon as you look like you're going to win it, or that you do win it, then your responsibility changes, that you have to create an out. You have to create that out ball, and that was, you know. But again, look, we were good at that last night again against a team that we pressed the life out of and made it very difficult for them. And we were able to get through the lines. But like I said, we will have tougher opposition to do that against, and we will have games that will run their courses in very different ways. But you still can't ignore that there's progress and that things are getting better, and that you can see it.
Well, anyone who won't even concede there's been progress won't concede much until Stephen Kenny wins the World Cup. Do you know what I mean? Like, if you're ignoring what's happened of late, then you've already made your mind up and you've got confirmation bias in all the wrong ways. So that's there. They do. Yeah, they can. You
know, like if people don't want to see progress, you're not going to see it. If you want to see it, you will. But at this point, I think it's painfully obvious that it's there. You know, it is there.
It is. And
it's good to see. You know, we should be optimistic about this. And, you know, like obviously, playing against Portugal and Luxembourg next month is going to be a sterner test of the progress that we're seeing.
Yeah.
And I suppose the zoomed out approach would be, can this progress ultimately match up against teams that we need to beat to qualify for a tournament and get ourselves to a tournament? That's the ultimate test of the system, the idea, and the progress. But again, we'll see that in time.
Yeah. I think that's why in some ways next month, the Luxembourg game to me is more interesting. I think that's such a perfect kind of test now for what progress has been really made. Yeah,
definitely. And it's, I suppose it's because of the hurt, like that game, that result really did hurt.
Yeah.
And that was a real turning point, I think. That was where people who maybe had that belief maybe started to doubt a little bit, because that was the point where you think we shouldn't need to go backwards to go forwards.
Yeah.
You know,
not this far. Yeah.
Go forwards. And that was a bit of a wake-up call, I think, for everybody, including Stephen and his staff, you know, because it is still, no matter what, it's going to be results that determine, you know, whether or not Ireland are successful. And ultimately that is just the nature of professional football and that level of the game. So, you know, would we be optimistic about that game, definitely, because I think we'll approach it in a different way. And the players are better at the stuff that they're being asked to do than they were when we played Luxembourg. And they're more educated. And he also has different options now to change games. There's different players who can bring different dimensions to the system. And he's had a chance to actually look at that and understand who can play this role, who's better in a game where we have to be a bit more defensive and counter, and who's better in a game where we can play the system and use it to be a creative system and go forward. So, and then if you're playing a game where it's going a certain way and you think we need something a little bit different, I think we have those players too now that can come off the bench and offer us something different. So I think that's exciting that, we have identified a system that looks to suit the players that we have, that allows them to play to their strengths. It's not often in the last number of years that as Ireland supporters that we have had a really good international window where we've scored goals, kept clean sheets and got good positive wins and enjoyed watching the way the team played. And I think for now, that's enough for where we are. And there's nothing wrong with just hanging on to that and going, right, this is great. Now let's see what can be done with that next.
One last point. I mean, it's unlikely Callum Robinson is going to score 5 in 2 games very often. So hopefully he chips in with more, but you're still Duffy and Bene scored as well, which is promising. I mean, God, we missed a lot of chances. You'd love if we had a few more natural finishers in there. I think that's always going to be a concern, certainly in the short term anyway.
Yeah, but I think as well, if we weren't, when you're not creating the chances, it's a bigger problem.
Sure.
But we are creating chances and we are creating different types of chances. And I think before that pressure, it was always like a monkey on the back kind of thing. Like, we just need to score. We just need to score. And every game it went on, it was just like, we need to score. We need to score. And you could see it as like, I'm not taking the shot in case I don't score, Yeah. And whereas that changed in this window. And Callum Robinson, had a different motivation. He just got in there and he was like, I'm hitting this. And he hit it. Because, whereas sometimes we had that tendency to maybe overplay it and no one seemed to want to take the responsibility for taking on the shot. At times, that's just a lack of confidence. But now going into the next 2 games, the confidence is there. The belief is there. And now fellas are probably going to fancy them chances because, I think 3 of the goals that have been scored have been deflections. So there's no such thing, people say the perfect goal. I think any goal is a perfect goal. As long as it goes into the back of the net, it's a goal. And it doesn't matter whether it's perfect, what way it goes in, it's a goal. And if that's the winning goal or proves to be a decisive goal, you take it all day, no matter how it goes in.
Listen, especially when you're Ireland. Lisa Fallon, great to have you on. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Lovely to chat.
Football on Off the Ball.
With Sky. Watch every single live Premier League game on Sky Sports, BT Sport and Premier Sports.
One, two, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2. Okay. All right, so that is pretty much us done for this evening. That was the football show and Off the Ball, brought to you by Sky. All the football you love in one place across Sky Sports, BT Sport and Premier Sports. As ever, the lads are back tomorrow morning on OTB AM from 7:30. Daniel Harris will be looking ahead to the weekend's Premier League fixtures. Keith Wood and Fiona Hayes will be talking rugby. And then tomorrow night, John Giles will be on with Nathan, giving his take on the international window that was Kavitha Davidson will be on as well on the sacking of the Raiders head coach John Gruden. Huge story obviously brewing over in the US. And should be a really good chat with Sky Sports presenter extraordinaire Kelly Cates as well. So that's all on the way on tomorrow evening's show. In the meantime, as ever, Mr. Tom Dunn on the way next. Now you're very welcome back. So